Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me. This is Michelle Hayward coming in with another episode from the Equity Pursuit. Today, I have with me Lynne Maureen Hurdle. If you have not met Lynne yet, you have not engaged with Lynne yet, whether it's in real life, which I met her first in real life, pre-pandemic, a few years before the pandemic, and we have since stayed connected. She has been on so many of our positive hire events. Oh my God. So she's like a regular for me. So, and to others of you, I'm going to introduce her today. She is a communications expert. Literally, that is her claim to fame, but she is so good at this. She is the founder of Her Calm Communications. Did I get that right?
Her communication solutions, yeah.
Her Communication Solutions. And when I say expert, she's been at this 40 years. From a bus being attacked by racists to literally building out, deciding not to go into performing arts to become a an actress, but to literally taking her performing skills and the ability to communicate to the masses in public service, now in her own organization, focusing on helping white people better understand racism and to become anti-racist. So Lynn, what did I leave out? Because I know I left out a lot because I get so excited
Oh,
whenever
that
we
I mean, I love the way you framed what you said. So I'm gonna be looking at the replay of this. I'm gonna take from that. I'm like, I really like how she did that, and I will be using that. I'm an author of a best-selling book, Closing Conflict for Leaders. I'm a coach, a keynote speaker. Yeah, and I'm a mom.
yes, that's that mom part, right? The
Yes,
mom of boys. That's
yes,
that's the biggest thing. Like, yeah,
yes,
that
that's correct. Yeah,
who are
that's
young men.
what
They're men now.
they're
Yes.
young men.
Oh,
They are 21 and about to be next week 27. So they are young men.
she like, yeah, stay out my pockets, but I love you. So, what I want to talk about today, what we're talking about today, is the work white people in DEI must do in order to improve progress.
Yeah.
And let's start um, really focusing in around some of your experiences that you've seen over the last few years,
Mhm.
especially in the work you do with corporate clients.
Yes. Yeah. What's interesting is, as Michelle said, I 3 years ago founded a program called On the Matter of Race. It's a 6 month journey for white people who are interested in learning about racism and doing something about it. And one of the first people, everyone that wants to be a part of the program has to be interviewed. It's really important that I know the commitment and I understand the thoughts and the background and the impetus behind folks who really want to be a part of On the Matter of Race. So everybody interviews. And one of the first people to interview was a woman who worked in corporate and had just been given this assignment to head up DEI work and to really look at how they might do more of it and do it better. And so she came on and she said to me, in particular, the Black people are unhappy with me heading this up. And I really don't understand that because it's important to me. This work is really important to me. I know that, in particular, things like racism are wrong, and I know that I'll do a good job. And so I said, well, that's interesting because it's interesting to me that they put in place a white woman to head this up. And so I'd love to have you be a part of On the Matter of Race. I'm glad that you feel like, hey, I should be doing something for my own education around racism. So that's why she reached out to me for On the Matter of Race. And we started our work. This is a 6 month journey. And 2 weeks into the work, she said, oh, I understand why they are upset with me. there is so much to learn. And I said, exactly. And it doesn't mean that your skin color qualifies you for the position, but the experience of understanding, right? Something like racism absolutely qualifies you for it. And when you experience it, you want to be sure that someone who's saying that they're heading up DEI uh, actually has a shot at understanding it better. And so that was really fun for me to let her do her own journey, right? She came and said, I don't know why they're mad. And then 2 weeks in, she discovered, I think I got a clue as to why they're not happy, right, with it. So I love that story because I think that it represents a lot of white people in the work. They may come into it with their heart in the right place, but we often always actually talk on the matter of race about being nice isn't enough. Being kind isn't enough. Teaching your children to be nice to people who are different from them just isn't enough. It requires that you do the work.
Ooh, so
Yeah,
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 that nice part is something we often hear, but I'm a nice person. And
yes,
there is such, for whatever reason, well, I know the reason is, oh, by being nice, then you can take out the action part of or addressing racism.
yeah.
Well, I wasn't rude about it, but you can still be a nice racist. There are ways to white people have been avoiding it,
Hmm.
and one of the most popular ways and common ways is saying, "But I'm a nice white person,"
Right,
and that
right.
doesn't change.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't change it. It doesn't give you the knowledge that you need to really
Yeah.
understand how racism operates, right? So if you and even as you think about the different categories that you're in, right? If you are a white male, right, then you are not understanding sexism and how it works. And if you're cisgender, if you are straight, I mean, all of those things remove you from
Yes.
the experience. If you're able-bodied, right? And we all have categories where we are not in that particular category. But when you are in a community that has been disenfranchised, right, you really do understand it better than someone who hasn't. And I'm sorry, and actually, I'm not sorry. The foundation that this country really needs to work on and start with is racism because
Yes.
it has a long historical foundation in this country. And so when you talk about white people in the work, you can't possibly understand what it's like to be a person of color that's subjected to the system of racism in this country.
I want to take this into the workplace, talking about corporate spaces when
Yeah.
it comes to racism. And what does that look like in the operate, how organizations operate?
Hmm. Yeah. Well, number one, people of color often come into uh, corporate spaces already understanding that their voices are not going to be valued in the same way that white voices are valued, that they have to, we often come in knowing that we could be scary, intimidating, right? I am so subjected to the angry black woman stereotype. It's amazing. My son, uh, Justin Naeem, who is 21, who works with me and now works with me and on the matter of race, he talks about how his passion is often seen as aggression or anger, right, rather than passion, right, for what he's talking about. So we do, and we do things like change our hair and change even the way that we will speak sometimes and whether we speak or not because we're often discounted. We're passed over for promotions. We're not seen often as qualified. We're seen as the diversity hire. right? Which automatically says that we're less than so many people that I work with who, even companies where they're saying we're addressing, right? We see our numbers, we see that this is a diverse organization. I will often hear people who will say, but I still feel like we should be hiring for quality, as if as, as if trying to make sure that you have a more representative organization being diverse means that everybody other than white is unqualified. I mean, it's or we can't find anyone, right? Because you're looking in all the same places and you're having people refer people that they know, and often white people know other white people almost exclusively,
Exactly.
right? So they're referring folks like that, or the company doesn't want to even address diversity at all. So you are working for a corporation that doesn't see it as an issue, so it's a
Yeah.
non-issue, right? Those are a lot of the things that I work with when I'm working with corporate space.
I want to go back to lowering the bar. Often, well, we aren't lowering the bar,
Right.
and oftentimes what we find is, especially LinkedIn makes it easier to do this. You will go and look and see if they have a Black person. Usually, they have multiple degrees or a higher engineering degree. Everybody else will have a humanities type of degree, and nothing against humanities, but the requirements for the Black person or the person of indigenous person, Hispanic person to get the job was so much higher, was
Yes.
so much higher than white counterparts. It's like, well, you don't really need a degree, but yet everybody who is not white have all of these additional credentials.
Hmm.
And I remember working in construction specifically, and was just looking at who was on our safety team. And let's say it was 5 people on our safety team. 3 of them white, 2 of them Black, all of them men. The 2 Black men, even though one was out of the military, he had a degree, and the one that was around my age also had a degree. The 3 white men, like, oh no, I was an EMT
Right.
at some point in time. So they had training, but it was completely different in the education levels that they came into the organization, even though one had retired after 20 years from the military. And
Right.
so when organizations really aren't saying, oh no, we aren't, I often push back like, well, you need to look at the qualifications of who's coming in, because they aren't. And they are saying, oh no, it's level or it's equitable. And oftentimes you have that mindset, you're lowering the standards, but yet who literally is coming in at a lower standard and is generally not BIPOC
Mhm.
employees.
Yeah, because we got to get in the door. And then the other thing is that you've got to get through that interview. So one of the things that happens too is they're looking for this fit, right? The
Yep.
culture fit or whatever. And so not recognizing that you're going to come from your lens and your perspective. And so unfortunately, this country sees different as something wrong, something as a deficit. And so when you hit that difference, then you're already thinking as a white person, oh, this isn't a fit, right, for who we are here, because everybody you brought on looks like you, sounds like you, thinks like you in many ways, even if they're in different departments.
It's absolutely, absolutely. When we look at the workplace, a couple other things you brought up that really resonated with me was the diversity part, but not the inclusion part.
Yeah, yeah,
And organizations, like, we can't find the talent, like talent just all of a sudden started at entry level. Um, if they do go, they're only looking at entry level. How do you propose white people think differently when it comes to recruiting or looking for talent? Like, what do they need to think about
yeah.
and change?
Well, first of all, if you want to talk about the inclusion part alongside of it, thinking most white people have never been in the position that Black, Indigenous people of color have been in, which is you're the one in the room, the only one who looks like you in the room, right? And so thinking about that, keeping that mindset of what will it be like for this person in this company, right? Understanding that if you aren't already diverse, which most aren't, then they may be one of one or one of very small group. So what will it feel like for them to be a part of it? The other thing is, I know finally there are companies that are catching on to going to HBCUs, right, and trying to interview and recruit from there. I think that's incredibly important. Educate yourself about HBCUs, right, and who offers what. There's gold there. I mean, and we're seeing that certainly in other spaces, right? I mean, even our vice president is HBCU. So, I mean, we are achieving. HBCUs are very competent, and they graduate very qualified people, but that's not often where corporations look. Also, to really make sure that people who are in the company that are not white have a voice in who they might want to refer, right? And where they might have ideas for where you want to recruit from, but to be open to not all of the same spaces. But I think the number one thing that I'm going to say is that when you believe that something or someone is out there, you search until you get what you want. And I often say that too many white people start off with the belief that we're not out there, that qualified people who look like you and I and people of color are not out there. So check your belief first. Because when you know we're out there, which we are in lots of numbers, then you're going to move heaven and earth to find us.
Absolutely. You brought up something else, and I know I promise you this is the last time, but you were talking about how white people generally around other white people and how they really study the segregation that white people have and being in all white spaces on purpose,
Mhm.
wherein BIPOC community are trying to integrate or go into spaces. Even when we look at integration, oftentimes there's a great article, I think it was about Seattle, or it's Portland or Seattle, I forget which one it is right now, where in the 80s, when they went to integrate schools, then they literally were only bringing the Black students out of their neighborhoods and their homes and their schools into white schools. They weren't doing anything in the opposite.
Right.
And the Black residents were like, oh no, this is not how this is going to work. And even they looked at, somebody shared a headline about how mad the Black residents were, or angry. I think the word was angry, and how it really turned on Black and angry. And it's like, really? And that was one of the sub headlines on the main page on the newspaper
Mhm.
page back in that 1980s article. And really the language that is used and how white people generally think, oh well, if it's white it's right, so we bring everybody into it. And we've seen the detriment of doing that time and time again. How do you What are things white people can do when they're thinking, oh, this is how we integrate people into this culture, but really not understanding the issues with only having that stance?
Yeah, you got to have opportunities for people to have conversations. I know some organizations have started affinity groups. Those tend to be, I'll call it triggering for white folk, because there is not they're not used to being excluded from anything, right? White privilege says that everything is open to you, not just to join, but to have an opinion on. And so affinity groups are often a little scary for folks, but there are companies that have them. But I do think that it's really important that you have an opportunity for folks to be able to share information on what it's like to be a part of the company, or what it's like to be a part of any company coming in when you are one of one or one of very few. What is that feeling like? And if nothing else, to really have it top of mind is so important. It's not something that you do necessarily with white candidates. So I understand that it isn't top of mind, but it's really important important that it be top of mind when you're talking about integrating a space where there aren't many of us at all. And so many people of color in corporate spaces talk about this, like what it's like. On the one hand, there's a sense of pride. On the other hand, there's a real sense that you're going to have to do a lot of things to either fit in or actually kind of remove yourself so that you keep yourself safe in that way. And what you want to make sure of is that, number one, you know that that's a part of how things are, right? Even if folks aren't willing to tell you that to begin with. And number two, that you start to look at creating spaces where people really can talk about the experience, not just coming into your space, but also the previous experiences that they've had and what's made it challenging for them, so that they have a voice also in you trying to make some changes to make sure that your corporate space is a welcoming and inclusive space. That doesn't happen automatically. It happens over time, but it never happens if you're not thinking about it.
Thank you, Lynn, for that. Exactly. You have to think about it. You have to definitely be intentional.
Mm-hmm.
I want us to discuss, still focusing in corporate spaces, policies and practices that white people need to better understand
Mm-hmm.
to improve the DEI progress. Or, you know how we have economic shifts and DEI is not a priority when it is not a priority for white people and businesses, but it's a lived experience and a
Yeah.
priority always for BIPOC people. So when we're looking at corporate policies and procedures, what are some areas organizations should be focused on?
Uh, well, I think not everybody. Let me take that back. I think more companies are looking at, right, the numbers game, right? Just like how many people are here and how do we diversify? And I think that tends to be a space of frustration for some, because it is not something that is an overnight process. It's not as simple as it used to be, right? When we're just doing folks who are like us. So I think that that's still something that companies really do need to get on board with. But I do think that we see more companies on board with that. But I also think that, for instance, there's a colleague of mine who talks about things like when you are looking to promote, right? What is it that are the qualifications for promotion? Are you looking at those policies? Are you looking at what is required? Are you looking to be sure that people have access to the kinds of skills that are needed for the next step? Are people to doing mentoring, right? Are there mentoring pieces? There's a corporation that I do a lot of work with that actually does reverse mentoring as well, where and folks are learning, white people are learning a lot from BIPOC because they really don't understand the experience out or inside the corporation. And so to be able to have someone who can teach them that, who's BIPOC, is really eye-opening. And it's also important because most of the time in reverse mentoring, you're looking at higher level management being mentored by BIPOC who are not on the same level as work. So I think that that's important. I think looking at your policies around now, right, working from home, virtual work versus having to come into the office, and how does that affect folks economically? I think that it's really important for companies to pay attention to childcare. Yeah, I know that applies to everyone, but often when you're talking about BIPOC who are coming in, particularly to entry level positions, there may be some real reasons to take a look at whether or not you're able to support folks, right, as they take this leap for themselves into this new environment. whatever way they come, whether it's virtual or in-house, in live, in person.
I appreciate that. I know I actually just got off a call with someone out of Pittsburgh, actually, who works over in workforce development, and
Hmm.
how companies will create jobs like, hey, these jobs are to help these people. And it was like, yeah, but how are they supposed to get there? And them not understanding culturally the other barriers certain communities have to overcome just to get to an opportunity. And not understanding what equity looks like
Right,
as well. When
right.
it comes to the job is one thing, but there are so many other barriers.
Yeah.
And
I want
so,
to say one more thing too,
yeah,
because I say this all the time to my folks who are of color and are bilingual. Y'all need to pay folks for that skill. Stop asking folks to translate for you, right? And there's no uh, compensation for it, or uh, not even the acknowledgement that that's an additional skill. I often will see that, somebody's resume, and I tell them, make sure you put it on the resume. And it's just like, oh, that's great. But that doesn't mean that's great, because that we will compensate for that, particularly as you go higher and higher up the ranks. It just means that's great. That's a great skill. And guess who's getting called on when someone needs that skill, but they're not getting paid for that skill.
absolutely. I want to bring in a comment from Karen, and I know it's a bit long, but I'm gonna read it. I have some observations. One in particular is the lack of sponsorship in corporate and the lack of growing organically African Americans to directorship and above. How do you get companies to address the key issue? By the way, there's such a difference between mentoring and sponsorship. Karen, I absolutely agree.
Mm,
Um, we
mm,
have been taught so much about mentorship. People have people literally leave out sponsorship. We've
yes.
heard it and had it talked about more the last 2 to 3 years. I know I've been talking about it since 2016, 2017, but it really hasn't been pushed until now. People are making mandatory sponsorship programs in
Yes.
certain organizations. So let's delve into that a bit about um, how do we get organizations to address this key issue of sponsorship in corporate spaces.
Yeah. I thank you, Karen, so much for that. And yes, there is a big difference, and I think that that has been and continues to be a challenge. Particularly, I'm just going to say this. Someone at my summit really spoke about that there's a real anti-blackness in this country, and so when you start to single out African Americans, right, there often is this wall that gets put up, and it becomes a thing of, wow, it's always about Black people, right? And there's so much more to it. I agree, there's so much more to diversity, but also there are issues that African Americans face that are very different when we start to talk about history and what we're looking at in terms of why we are where we are now, as opposed to where we could be had things been rectified and been different. So I want to say that up front, that
Yeah.
becomes an issue for folks in corporate spaces when you start to address African Americans in general, right? But I will say that we have to come to a place of being able to talk about it ourselves, right? I think that we tend to be social in talking to one another outside of the company, or even sometimes at lunch, at the lunch table. That book is still true. Why all the Black kids sitting together in the cafeteria? We still do that in corporate spaces, and I love it. I'm sorry, I won't apologize for it. I love it because we need the support of one another. But I do think that we need to be organized in ways where we are talking to one another about being able to approach someone who would have that ear, right? Someone who in the corporate space would be looking to achieve the same thing, but I think that we've got to be able to have numbers behind it. And I know that that's a challenge when the issue is that we don't have numbers in the corporate space, but I do think that we have to be able to speak about it where we are and really make the case for why that's important for folks. I also think that we've got to know when we're in a space where there's no one who really wants to hear it. And because I feel like we waste a lot of our own emotional, mental, and physical energy trying to make something happen that it just ain't never going to happen in that particular space. So if we're in a space where we believe that there is an ear or two or three that will be open to hearing about it, then even if it's just two of us, then if we're the only two here who can make the case, then we're the two who are going to make the case for it and continue to push for it and not let go of it, because the money is there. They can the talent is there. They can make way for it. But if we're not together in making the case, then it often becomes like this lone voice. And if we're not educating on what it even means, right? Mentorship versus sponsorship, right? If we're not educating them on what it means and the benefit to them, then it's not something that's going to cross their minds. Or if it does because of us, then they're not really going to be able to think about vision, right? How does this play out here? And I know that we don't need any more work on our plate, but unfortunately, the work is often going to be in our corner in really trying to lay it out, right? Vision it, lay it out, and find those ears that can really push with us.
Absolutely. I think ERGs are definitely a great way to
Mhm.
roll out and create a sponsorship program as well, because a lot of organizations are leaning to them, help us understand how to do it. Oh, here's how to do better. Put money behind this, because they fund ERGs so very lightly, and oftentimes they don't even fund them equally,
That's
either
right.
by head count or just across the board. So it's really interesting. I don't think we use the same language. We don't negotiate, and we wait for opportunities rather than creating them. Okay, so just a comment. So I think
Mhm.
I think Karen and I agree with that. And I think also what happens is we
Yes.
don't always understand the opportunities that are available to understand what to negotiate.
Right.
And so it's going to take a Karen, it's going to take a Lynn, it's going to take a Michelle, and a few others to help more people in corporate space. I'm speaking specifically corporate spaces, to understand and share what are these opportunities and options, and how to really create those. So once we start building out frameworks and helping to train, and it won't be a lot of us to do it. You may only have 5 to 10 people, depending on the size of the organization, that are going to go in and really do this work. The bad part is they're the only ones doing the work, so they get worn out and tired. And
Yes.
so you also have to find a system to roll them in and out, so that you don't lose the knowledge, you
Hmm.
don't lose them completely, but they get times and periods of rest. And that's often what we're seeing, so many ERG leaders getting really frustrated and tired by all the work they're doing and the lack of progress that's going on. So if
Yeah.
you are utilizing the ERG, definitely have some measurable metrics in there. Go
Yeah.
ahead, Lynn.
Yeah, and I was going to say also, it's amazing to me. I have watched this one person who is in my On the Matter of Race group, started in the level 1, is now level 5, carry the case by herself to the organization and never let it go. And what she's been able to achieve is we now have a C-suite group. We're in our second year of a C-suite group. She's been able to bring me in as a speaker to different departments, and the organization is sponsoring people into On the Matter of Race. We have 10 people from this same organization who are in just the outside program, my On the Matter of Race program, and then we have 8 people in the current C-suite group doing On the Matter of Race. And this is all paid through the company. So, and it's one person's effort who believed in it and who's carried it through. So I'm just saying that, yes, I agree. We have to not wait for the opportunities. We have to create them. And you just don't know. You get that right ear. And if they're as tenacious as we are, they will push it through, because let's face it, that's who they're going to listen to, right? Before they listen to us. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so if you're white, like I'm an ally, these are the things you're going to be utilizing your privilege for.
Yes.
Is to push through these programs, to get them funded, to get them sponsored, to make sure they don't disappear after 1 or 2 years, right? They're literally ingrained into the organization. They're building in and they're improving over time, and they're still beneficial and bringing impact to the organization. Somebody like, well, this program's been here 10 years. Hasn't it been long enough? Well, let's look at the data. Let's look at what's going on, because that is going to tell. It's not the length of the program, it's actually the change that is going in the shifts and changes going on in the organization to determine how impactful it is and whether or not it needs to be changed, molded, or discontinued. And you won't know that without asking, where were we 10 years ago? Where were we 8 years ago, 5 years ago? Where are we today? To really assess whether or not it's been impactful. And I don't think a lot of organizations, just on the consulting side, even know what to measure. Like, the proposals are so everywhere. But I wanna get back to us talking about things that white people can do, because we're a little bit over. We're not a lot, but we know we knew how we were gonna do.
That's right. Okay, so here's the first thing. Number one, please understand that while being nice is wonderful, we appreciate it. Please keep being nice. Please keep smiling and being kind, right? But that is not going to do anything to move the needle when it comes to racism, right? And so the first thing is that you got to know that you are not the expert. Therefore, if you're in a position where you're supposed to be the expert, recognize you're not. That means that you've got learning to do, right? And so learning from the experiences of folks who actually live this, and get your company to sponsor you to do the work. You got to do the work. It can't just come out of your heart. It's got to be about understanding how systemic racism, first of all, that it exists, that race is a construct, that the system is in everything that we do, everything we need to live. Racism is embedded, the foundation of those systems. And if you don't understand that, which most white people do not, they think that racism is individual acts, right? Yeah, that's one of the things. But the thing that is really the thing that's holding folks back and has continued to hold folks back for years, centuries, not years, centuries, is that racism is systemic. So you need to learn about it. You need to learn how it operates. You need to learn how it exists within you, right? What are the things that you believe and do that uphold racist policies and practices, even when you're not meaning to? How does it operate in your organization? Like, these are the things that you can't simply know because you're a nice person. So you really do need your company to invest in you doing the work in somebody's program, right? And there are programs out there, mine being one of them, but certainly you have to do that. The other thing is to understand that it's lifelong work, that you don't just get a certificate and then you're qualified, you're right to do it, that it is lifelong work, that there are people who are there at your organization who can help you, but they don't have to. They're not obligated to, and you need to be thinking about ways to compensate them if they are asked to do this on a regular basis for your benefit, right? Because here you are in this position of power, and people who are not in that position, you're asking about their experiences. Well, that needs to be compensated. And like I said, you need to really make sure that you're doing some work outside of having those kinds of conversations. And I need you to be conscious of the fact that you're always going to have to be learning something new about, because I'm going to tell you, as much as it is systemic, it is often always changing as well to keep one step ahead, because when we get some gains, then there's some new policy or a law that gets purposely enacted. And that's the other thing you got to know, that a lot of this is purposeful, as much as that's difficult for you to take in, right, about folks, but it's true. But something gets enacted that is meant to stop, not even challenge, to stop the progress that's being made. And we're seeing it everywhere.
Absolutely. I want to read one question we have in the chat, and I'll share it.
Hmm.
How can I help as a rather privileged German Jewish American coming to the US at 19, having seen about 5 Black people before coming to the US inspired by jazz? I was immediately shocked by racism. I've never quite found anything that I could do that is satisfying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I would say that you need, what is it that you would like to do? What are some of the actions that you want to take? What is it, knowing that this is the background that you came from? Are you open to being involved? I'd love to invite you to interview for our program. I know Michelle's going to share the link. I'd love to talk with you about what it is that you would like to learn and to do, because I do think that if you want to help, if you want to do something, it doesn't have to be huge. I think that's the other thing that happens, is that white people think, I can't do anything, right? I can't destroy racism all on my own, but you can learn how to have the conversations with other white people to help them to understand it better. You're going to be privy to conversations that we are never going to be privy to. All right. So because the episodic racism, where somebody calls us the N word to our face, that is far and few between the everyday interactions, right? And repercussions from the laws and policies and beliefs and actions, right? That's the everyday stuff that white people are much more privileged to than we are. Things will be said about our groups in your presence that they will never say. In ours, well-meaning, good white folk, right, will have those kinds of conversations. So I'd love to invite you to sign up for an interview and check us out, and at least have the conversation, so that you can really think about and begin to plan, like, what is it that I can do? Because don't think that even small actions don't make a difference. They do, as long as they're beyond just being kind.
So he is all open to interviewing. I'm going to send you the link directly. So for those of you like, wait, I have to interview. So Lynn does not accept everybody that applies. She before she even we never even started telling people exactly how On the Matter of Race
Yeah,
started,
yeah.
because you were asked by certain people to
I
do
was
it, and you
asked by
kept
two white
saying,
women to do it, and I said no, because white people are often resistant. And the more we talked, the more I thought, no, I'm supposed to do this, but I've got to put parameters around it. And the parameters, one of them is that everybody's got to be interviewed, because I need to know that you are in the space of the commitment that it takes to do this, that you are in the space of wanting to learn rather than tell me how it's done, right? Because we do have folks who think they know more about racism than I do, who are white, and that it just isn't true. And so I need to know that this is the space that folks are in, because people in our folks in On the Matter of Race, that's where we are. That's where folks come to knowing there's so much that I don't know and I really want to learn. Doesn't mean you don't get to ask questions. Doesn't mean you don't get to say, this is challenging me. Oh, all of that's good. But everybody can't, everybody isn't ready. Everybody isn't ready.
and this is for white people, and some people are like, why? What's that one question that I really love that we talked about during your most recent summit, Lynn? I don't want to get it wrong.
Yes, Paul said, "I don't speak up because I don't want to get it wrong," and Michelle said, "Well, you're already getting it wrong, so you might as well speak up, particularly if you're doing the work, right? It's never going to be perfect, right? And as white people, you're never going to be able to have the experience. I know folks think you have. Oh, there's reverse racism. Let's not even go there because the system was made to benefit white people. It was not made to benefit the rest of us. So when you talk about reverse racism, yeah, people could be prejudiced and say some things to you, right, that are nasty things in terms of race. But in terms of being able to hold you back on a job, keep you from getting a job, keep you from getting a bank loan, keep you from getting a mortgage. I mean, the list goes on and on. No, we are not in those positions. We're just not.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Thank you so much, Lynn. So y'all have the link for On the Matter of Race. Check it out. It may you like Michelle. It's not for me, but I know it's for some people. Share it with those people
Please.
that say they're allies. Say, hey, why don't you hone your skills even more? I know a program for you to check out. You have to interview for it, but it's been around and it's run by an absolutely phenomenal communication specialist named Lynne Maureen Hurdle. So, Lynn, thank you so much for joining
You.
me. Whew, I love it when we get together. Everybody, thank you so much for joining as well. I'll be back with a few more talks, but we have our virtual summit coming up for people analytics and diversity, equity, inclusion at the end of September. So stay tuned for that. We're releasing some new information, so I'm excited. Yay. So, Lynn, have a great weekend. Everybody else, the same. And I will talk to y'all soon.
Yeah.